As parents, we usually think that we know what's best for our children, and we don't tend to listen closely to their complaints. That's something we really don't like to admit to, but in practice it's probably more true than false. Subconsciously, we often think that others think and feel just like we do, especially our children who are just younger versions of ourselves, aren't they? Rationally, we know it's not true, and rationally we know that our children are influenced by their own experiences separate to ours. Trouble is that rational thinking takes a lot of energy, so mostly we spend the majority of our time thinking superficially, not listening with intent, not understanding fully. And if it's not rational thinking, then it's irrational thinking. Do you know what's best for our children? At a certain age, they're truly the ones to decide that. Today we're looking at understanding the difference between J, judging, structured, and P, perceiving, going with the flow, child and parent type relationships. I've worked with a couple of perceiving parents, people who didn't want to put too many deadlines or structures into their children's lives. They preferred a sense of flow, and they assumed it'd be right for their children too. How wrong they were. Their flexible approach to life drove their judging son Nick, who loved structure and schedules, to distraction. When he told them about his frustration, they ignored him and continued to follow their preferred way of parenting because it felt normal and comfortable to them. When I sat down with Nick's parents, he reiterated his stresses. He explained how upset he was when last-minute decisions were made without allowing him time to prepare for the required changes to his personal schedule. His parents' casual attitude to their responsibilities around his schooling, such as getting him to school on time, having diaries signed, returning notices before the final request, and attending parent meetings, made him feel like they didn't care about him or his schooling. Nick was in a constant state of stress, unable to plan ahead or even organise his daily life because he had to depend on his parents. His anger and distress at his parents' indifference to his need of punctuality and order was an eye-opener for them. But after learning about different personality types, his parents were able to understand, and so was he, about their differing points of view. They explained to him that they had great intentions. They didn't want to be too uptight or stress Nick out by putting high expectations on him. In turn, Nick was able to help them understand his side of the personality story. He explained that their actions were stressing him more, not less. For him, feeling less stressed, time management was a high priority. Being punctual, or even early at times, especially for school drop-off, was heaven for him. Getting anything signed and handed back as early as possible felt right. Knowing that his mum and dad would attend meetings held for parents, even though they thought that they knew everything that was happening at school, made him feel cared for. Letting him know in advance, wherever possible, that changes to schedules involving him would be made him feel more secure. Nick's parents were shocked at how different their perception of being great parents was to their son's perception. They were more than prepared to start making changes to their own behaviours and looking at things from his perspective. However, let's remember, this isn't an overnight fix. By changing your preferred ways of doing something that isn't your natural preference actually takes a lot of thought, time, and resolution. But the fact that they acknowledged how important the things were for them and began to change was really important for Nick. He started to feel heard and was more able to forgive and forget when his parents occasionally stuffed up. He knew it was a two-way street, and he had to give and take as well. I'm Kate Mason, and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Today we're talking about different types, the way they parent and how they successfully parent together using type as a part of their dynamic. My guest today is Jan Terkelsen. She and her sister are the directors and podcast hosts of People Leaders, and they have been working with leaders in their teams for over 20 years. Hi, Jan.
Hi, Kate.
Now, you've been using personality tools within the framework of your business and podcast. Can you give us an overview of how you use these tools in a business sense?
Sure, Kate. You know, when you say 20 years, it seems such a long time, but it's even longer. My daughter was, 2 when we did our certification. She's 26 now. So, yes, we've been using Myers-Briggs in all different facets, especially during business. And I think one of the most easiest and obvious ways that we use our understanding of Myers-Briggs is when we're communicating, especially with clients and even on podcasts. So we get a sense of whether or not someone has a preference preference for extroversion. And if that's the case, then we have an understanding that they might like that enthusiastic, that interaction to build on the conversation approach. And then if that we get a sense that someone has a more introverted preference, that's when we would definitely slow things down a little bit and give people time to really think and reflect and space to respond. Because as you know, Kate, the most of the world is set up for the extroverts. Like we want answers now and we want that answer straight away. Whereas there's the richness, especially for people with introversion, when they have that time and space to respond. And so therefore we would give people the heads up about the type of questions that we're going to ask before we have a conversation with them. We'd have a bit of a detailed agenda just so they have an understanding and an opportunity to pre-pay their thinking.
And that's really true, because someone missed out on my business once because my husband wanted to change our financial advisors, and he took me to one and he didn't talk to me. He didn't ask me anything personal about myself. He shared nothing. And it went away. And my husband's an introvert, and he actually liked him because of that. And our accountant is an extrovert. And I just said to him, no way, I'm not going anywhere where I can't have a chat to someone about where they've been on holiday or whatever. And that guy actually lost our business. Now, he didn't realize it and he wasn't doing anything bad, but he didn't recognize anything about what people were like. And that's why it's so important, really, really important. So how has this played into your personal life, into your relationships, your marriage, the partner that you're with, your husband?
Right. Well, whenever I run a Myers-Briggs workshop, I'll either bring my mother up or my partner up, and sometimes my kids, because they're such rich sources of information and examples of type. So my partner is an introvert and I'm an extrovert. So that in and of itself is a difference. However, what we've found, and you would know, Kate, that especially the research suggests that those introverted and extroverted partners, there's longevity in those marriages because it just seems to work. Now, with my partner, what I have had to learn is that if I want a response from him, I actually have to stop. So if I'll say, so what do you think what do you want to do about the kids or the holidays, and I'll be waiting, for an answer. Whereas now I actually literally have to remove myself. Like I'll ask him the question, but then I'll remove myself. Because I remember asking him once and, I go, yeah, what do you think? When he goes, I actually need time to think, Jan. I went, oh yeah, that's right. So that's one thing that I really learnt to do, is to give him the time and the space to think. Because as an extrovert, I can just have an answer straight away, whereas he needs that time. And then the other part is that my husband and I both are intuits, which I think is I'm really grateful for that, because what I've found is the intuit and the sensor, when they're very different, that's what brings out a lot of the conflict, because it's that, the type of information that you know and like and trust. So we're similar, we're the same on that. He is a thinker. And so he's very, logical, and everything is evaluated, whereas I'm a feeler. And so it's based on, the connection with people. So, how you were saying, your accountant or whatever, your financial advisor, yeah, I want to be connected to that person. That's right. Whereas my husband would just be about, can they do the numbers? And then our other side is that I'm a judger. So I'm an ENFJ, so an extroverted intuit, a feeler, but also a judger, which is an unfortunate name, I know. However, I love, getting things done. So my favourite words are done and next. I love to have a list and, go off it. The thing for me is that I have to actually linger a little bit longer, in the completion of things, instead of just kind of like always wanting to, go forward. Whereas my husband is a perceiver. So he is okay in, the process and, trying to extract more information. So I remember when we were had to update our computers, and so I had a couple of things, like how much megabytes, the cost, and maybe the color, right? And so my husband, he has a whole list of things that he wanted, and so his joy was in the researching and the process and all that, whereas mine was like, my joy is in actually getting it in my hot little hands. So things like that we've had to learn to broaden, I suppose, our repertoire. And that's what I talk about with a lot of people, is that type doesn't define you, but it just gives you an opportunity to go, oh, okay, I'm a little bit inflexible here, or this is a habitual way that I operate. Is there a way that I can broaden? And so I've really had to learn that with my husband. And we've been married for, like 33 years now, so, and happily.
Yes.
Like a long-term marriage doesn't necessarily mean a happy marriage, but we've got both, so yeah, it's working.
Absolutely. And that's what I start my workshops with too, is the discovery of type when I was in my early 20s and my husband and I were married and constantly fighting. And had we not had the tool of type and temperament to get ourselves through, we wouldn't be here. We're here 36 years later and happy. And like I always say to people, it all takes work, though. You never stop working on a relationship. It's part of life. There are good times and there are obviously going to be not so great, but it gives you a wonderful tool, like you say, to understand the other person. The thing about it is that I agree with you, the sensing and intuitive level too, because I know many people that have been in relationships, and it's really hard because the intuitive's mindset is such a different mindset to the sensing type. And if you're in a relationship and you don't realize that you're a person that loves detail and you're going out with someone that wants to save the world, that's interested in going on missions to look after people, and you've got no headset that's similar, but you don't know why. And even when you know why, it still makes it tricky. And especially if they're an introvert and you have to read their brain. Whereas at least with an extrovert, you hear about it. Whereas an introvert, it's all sitting inside there, not to be released unless something happens that's really, really important. So were there some challenging times to start with in your relationship before did you use type immediately to kind of work each other out, or?
Yeah, totally. I think by that time it was, part of my DNA type. I used to think about it all the time, like I'd type people in airports and in conversations and things like that. It's just, it's something that I can't not do now. But I remember what you were saying, Kate, with my husband, is that I'd want to get inside his head. Like, what are you actually thinking? Like, you get to actually hear what I'm thinking. I don't get the benefit of that. And so I'd ask him a question, like, what did we decide? And he goes, oh, I thought I told you, what we were going to do. Well, no, you thought you told me, but you kept it up here. And so that was the real challenge, is I suppose having that expectation that he was going to be someone that he's not. He's not going to be the type of person that comes home and goes, hey, guess what? I did this, this, and this. I'm the one who would then, extract it. And when he's ready, he will tell me. And then, the best thing I remember is when my husband says, oh, I've been thinking. And I'm going, oh, great. He's sharing what he's been thinking. Oh, like whenever we go out to dinner, as an extrovert, I have to be prepared for us not to talk and be okay with that. And it's like, okay, so there've been some real opportunities for me. And so even though we've been married for 33 years, there are times that it's still challenging. I'll say to him, yeah, I just would want a little bit more on that. So he'll give me some detail, but I actually want to know contextually. So what was your thinking behind that, and how did you feel, and, what did you think, and those kind of things. And, as we go along, we are building, we continue to build that, but that definitely was a frustration. And the other biggest, I suppose, issue that has come to light with us is when we're having a conversation, I can get really excited and I talk really fast and then I want to jump in. But I've really had to temper myself, because if I interrupt my husband, he will see it as me being, disrespectful. And that's so not my intention, but he really sees it as an affront. And when I've talked to other people with introversion, a lot of them have that same the reaction when people interrupt them. So that's something that I've really had to learn, and it's been for my benefit as an extrovert. And I do it with my friends now. When I'm having a conversation, they'll be saying something and inside I go, oh my God, yes. And then I go, just listen. And the best compliment that I have received from my friends is when they say, oh my God, Jan, you are such a good listener. I go, yes, you know what I mean? Like I'm working my craft.
Hey, parenting's a tough gig. There are no rule books. Just you and any well-meant advice, books that don't always hit the mark, and, well, maybe your well-meaning mother-in-law telling you what to do. No one knows your kid or you. Contact me and we'll find out how you can connect to your most important treasure. thepersonalitycoach.com.au. It takes so much to listen really well. It takes so much for everybody to listen really well. And like you say, when an extrovert really listens, because in our heads, we've got a great story to top the one that you're talking about. And I agree. I sit there and I bite my tongue literally, because I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, we could have so much fun with this. And when someone does say you're a great listener, that is really a fantastic compliment for us. And I get that. So your husband's type is actually, for me, one of the trickiest, because they're my opposite type. Okay, totally opposite. Not quite totally to you, because you've got your big picture. When I'm confronted with an INTP, the conversation is very stressful. I know that they're just looking at me thinking, oh, this dumb blonde, seriously, what is she talking about? Because I'm all fluff and warmth and all the rest of it. And they're the most... my brother is one. And years ago, I had a client who was saying, oh, look, I think Myers-Briggs is all horoscope. And I spoke to my brother, and he had done Myers-Briggs several times in his organisation, although he'd never told me. He used to just tease me about, this is just rubbish, Kate, whatever you're talking about. And he said, oh, no. He said, I believe in it. He said, it's a fantastic thing. I use it all the time at work. He said, I don't really like using it because I don't really want to be tied to a model of behaviour. But he said, ask this guy if he wants to be the sharpest tool in the shed or the bluntest. And that defines the use of things like that, because the INTP always wants to be the sharpest, but they are very inward thinking, and it's really hard to get a conversation out of them. And, my brother will come and visit my mother, and she'll say, he didn't really talk much at all, dear. And I'll say to her, well, Mum, you have to sit there and you have to chip away, but she's an introvert. She doesn't chip away. And often introverts don't, and they never end up with a conversation, so it doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's right. Because I know with my husband, if he's talking about something that he's really passionate about, then, there's no stopping him. So I notice those things that really light him up, and they're the conversations that, just are beautiful and flow and things like that. And, they're just some of the things that we have learned, or I have learned, to manage that. And then, just accepting silence. Silence is okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It just means that we're comfortable being silent. So we'll go on, like car rides, and we won't have anything on, not a podcast or whatever. And I really appreciate that now. Sometimes then I'll turn something on, or then we'll have a discussion about it and things like that. But he has shown me another aspect to myself that perhaps I wouldn't have if I'd married, someone who has extroversion. And I think the differences, our diversity, the one thing that is very similar are our values. And I think that's what works for us. Even though we're quite different, our values are very aligned. And so,
No, and it does make a real difference. So when looking at types, what are the differences? Give me just a few differences of your parenting styles.
Yeah, so with my husband, because he's more of that introverted thinker, he's very brief. in his description about what he wants. Whereas I will fluff, I will be the feeler. And so one of the examples is I'll say, hey, Tully, do you think you could take the bins out? Like I'm asking him, and my son will say, so is that a question, or you actually want me to take the bins out? I want you to take the bins out. And my husband will say, Tully, take the bins out, please. It's Saturday morning, blah, blah, blah. So that's one of the things. I'll ask questions as opposed to being direct, whereas my husband will be quite direct in our parenting styles. And sometimes I will see it as a little bit harsh, but depending on who he's talking to, he'll match that. So if he's talking to our son, who's very similar to my husband, it'll be short, sharp, to the point. Whereas with my daughter, who's more of that feeling, then he will accommodate that and maybe add a little bit more softness and into that request or the conversation. So that's definitely one way that we've had to I suppose, manage our different styles. And the other thing, I think, the speed at which we come to conclusions about things. You know, I will, as soon as I've got enough information to act on something, bang, I'm an action person. Whereas my husband will linger longer, so much so that sometimes he will procrastinate. And I will jump into action quicker, that sometimes I will miss an opportunity to have a little bit more information. So they're the things that we've had to really manage in the way in which we parent, is that I will just need to not jump into action sooner, and my husband needs to jump into action a little bit sooner than what he would normally. So there's some of the things that we've had to really, work on.
And it's great to have that awareness, because it does stop fights. It does stop you being angry with each other. And look, a lot of the time in my presentations, I talk about perception. And this is the biggest thing about all of this, is that we all have totally different perceptions, because we all come from totally unique places. And often we're assuming that the other person is thinking just the same way that we're thinking. And I had a group of accountants once, and I stood in front of them with my, warm, empathetic, going, you need to put yourself in the shoes of other people. And someone put their hand up, and he was they're all thinking types. And he said, so you mean we manipulating people? And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm saying the wrong things in the wrong room. So I said, yes, I guess that's it. You are manipulating, getting people to do stuff that you want by doing this kind of thing. And I went home and I told my whole family of thinkers, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe he said this. And they all said, well, that's exactly what you're doing, isn't it? So knowing your family and knowing how they think and knowing how you think it's just such an important part of being a partner and a parent. When you're in your family, it's such an important thing to know. I couldn't live without it. I'm like you. I'm just like, I sit there and I utilize the thought about it every day. I don't box people, but I use the thought of that every day. So thank you so much for sharing with me today all about Myers-Briggs and letting people know the differences and how to deal with some of those differences. I hope that you have a wonderful day and that you keep sorting things out. Thanks for joining me today, Jan. It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you.
It has been. Bye.
To be clear, your personality type doesn't determine whether you're a good parent or a bad parent. Any type can thrive as a parent or a caregiver. There are just some things in the MBTI that can help you. It can help you pinpoint your strengths and your blind spots as they relate to parenting and relationships. It offers an insight for you of your home environment and how you can create it to facilitate the growth of everyone. It helps you find the ways to improve communication with your kids, and it motivates you to connect with your family at a deeper level. I'm Kate Mason, and thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about the podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my newly launched book, Who is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.